The locket fell from his coat pocket with the soft, fatal sound of inevitability, a small golden disc that spun once upon the polished library floor before coming to rest at the toe of Lady Eleanor Ashworth's silk slipper. She had not meant to be in the Duke's library at such an hour. The great clock in the entrance hall had already struck 11, and every rule of propriety demanded she retire to her chambers, far from the smouldering hearth and the deep, lingering scent of cedarwood and leather that seemed to belong as entirely to Edmund Blackwell, the Duke of Ravenscroft, as the very walls that contained it. And yet she had come in search of a volume of verse, one she had glimpsed upon his shelves that very afternoon, and now she stood quite alone, the draughty silence pressing in around her, staring at the small golden object at her feet. She should have left it where it lay, she knew that. Every fibre of her careful, well-bred upbringing whispered that to touch what was not hers would be an impropriety too grievous to name. And yet her fingers, those slim, pale, treacherous fingers, had already descended. The locket was warm, as though it had only recently been held, as though it had been pressed against a living heartbeat. Before we venture any further into this extraordinary tale, if you are new to this channel, welcome. You have found your home. Please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters, where every single week we bring you immersive stories of passion, buried secrets, and scandalous Regency romance that will leave you breathless. Your support means everything and costs you nothing but a single tap. Now, back to Eleanor and the locket she should never have opened. The clasp yielded to her thumbnail with a whisper of resistance, as though even the small mechanism understood the gravity of what was about to be revealed. The candlelight nearest her trembled in the draught from the east-facing windows, casting a warm, unsteady glow across her fingers as they parted the two halves of gold. And there, nestled inside upon a bed of cream velvet no larger than a sovereign coin, was a miniature portrait of her. Not as she was now, not the composed, dark-eyed young woman of 22 who had accepted the Duke's courtship with measured gratitude and carefully concealed delight. No, this was a child, a girl of perhaps 7 or 8, with the same serious, watchful eyes, the same particular tilt of the chin, the same small, determined mouth set in the expression her own mother had once called, with a fond exasperation, "Your stubborn little frown." Eleanor's breath did not escape her in a gasp. It left her in absolute silence, which was somehow far worse. She stood there in the Duke's library, the cold draught threading mercilessly through the thin silk of her evening gown, the candlelight throwing trembling shadows across row upon row of leather-bound volumes, and she felt the entire architecture of the last 6 months shift beneath her feet like river sand giving way to current. Edmund Blackwell had come into her life at the Pemberton Ball in March. She remembered it with the unerring precision of something she had replayed too many times in the hours between midnight and dawn, the way he had crossed the ballroom towards her with that deliberate, unhurried stride, as though he possessed all the time in the world and had decided long ago exactly where to spend it. She had told herself his interest was sudden, unexpected, fortune smiling upon her at last after years of quiet struggle. She had believed with the whole of her earnest, hopeful heart that she had been chosen, that some ineffable chemistry of souls had drawn the Duke of Ravenscroft across that candlelit room to her and her alone. But a portrait painted when she was a child could not be sudden, could not be accidental, could not be anything other than premeditated. She did not hear him enter the library. The Duke of Ravenscroft moved through his own ancestral home like a shadow moving through water, and it was only when his voice came from the doorway, low and controlled, and carrying that particular note of a man who has just witnessed something that cannot be taken back, that Eleanor turned to face him. Eleanor. He did not say, "What are you doing here?" He did not say, "Put that down." He said only her name, and in those 4 syllables was contained an entire world of reckoning. She extended her arm and held the open locket towards him, her posture steady, though the rest of her was not. "Explain this to me," she said. Her voice was extraordinary to her own ears, perfectly level, stripped of every tremor she felt compelled to suppress. "Explain it to me plainly, Edmund, without the pretty speeches you have practiced. Explain to me why you carry a portrait of me as a child in a locket that you wear against your heart." He did not look away from her. That she would remember afterwards, that he absorbed her gaze without flinching, without reaching for the defensive composure she had observed lesser men deploy when discovered in their smaller deceits. What she saw in his countenance instead was something far more disquieting. Relief. As though he had been waiting, dreading and longing in precisely equal measure for exactly this moment to arrive. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I will not sit down." She took a single step toward him. "I will stand precisely here in your library beside your fire until you tell me the whole and unvarnished truth." Edmund crossed the room. He did not reach for the locket. He lowered himself into the chair nearest the hearth, pressed his clasped hands against his mouth, and for a long, weighted moment he simply regarded the flames. The fire snapped once, sharply, like a punctuation mark. "The portrait was given to me by my father on his deathbed 3 years ago." Eleanor said nothing. She let the silence do its necessary work. "The confession he made to me that night, one he had carried for 20 years and could no longer hold in his chest without it destroying him entirely. Your father, Eleanor, your true father and mine, were once in partnership, in the years before you were born. There was a fortune, investments, considerable land holdings, and a substantial inheritance that was to pass to your mother upon her marriage, and my father—" He stopped. He pressed his thumb to the bridge of his nose. "My father took it from them, through deliberate deception, through forged documents, and the calculated exploitation of a man who trusted him without reservation. He ruined your family quietly and called it misfortune. He watched you grow up in reduced circumstances and called it the will of Providence." The candle nearest Eleanor guttered violently in a cold draught, then steadied itself with admirable resolve. "The portrait," he said, "was painted at your mother's commission when you were a child. She gave a copy to my father as a gesture of sincere friendship before she ever suspected what he had done to her. He kept it, perhaps out of guilt, that slowly calcified into something he could not name, and when he pressed it into my hand along with his confession, he told me to make it right." Eleanor heard her own voice arrive from a very great distance. "You sought me out deliberately." "Yes." "The Pemberton ball, the walks, the letters you wrote me, every last one, were my design." He rose then. He stood very still, in the manner of a man who understands with absolute clarity that to move toward her would be an unforgivable presumption. "I came to you with the intention of restoring what was taken, to make legal and proper restitution, to set your family's circumstances right, and to withdraw from your life with a clear conscience and a settled debt. And instead," she said, because she required the particular cruelty of saying it herself, "you asked me to marry me. Instead," he said, and his voice was wrecked and quiet in equal measure, "I made the catastrophic error of coming to know you, your mind, your stubbornness, the precise and particular way you argue a point until it submits to reason." His gaze dropped to the locket in her hand. "I have asked myself 1,000 times whether what I feel for you is genuine or merely the residue of obligation. I have no answer that fully satisfies me. I know only that the thought of you belonging to any life that does not include mine has become something I cannot contemplate with equanimity. If you are still with us, and how could you leave now, with Eleanor standing in that fire-lit library, holding the truth in her hand, do not forget to subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters. New stories arrive every week, and every one of them lives because of your support. Hit that subscribe button now, and let us see this through to the very last word together." Eleanor looked down at the portrait of herself, that solemn, unsuspecting child who had known nothing yet of fortune, of betrayal, and of the complicated, beautiful mathematics of a man's conscience undone by love. "You should have told me," she said. "From the very beginning, you owed me that honesty." "Yes." He did not argue, did not qualify or deflect. "I failed you in precisely that regard, and I will own it without condition for as long as you require me to." She was quiet for a moment that stretched the length of several heartbeats. She thought of his letters, of the handwriting she had come to know as well as her own, the careful loops and precise strokes of a man who chose his words like a jeweler selects stones, with unhurried deliberateness. She thought of the way he listened when she spoke, as though her words were the only sounds worth attending to in any crowded room. She thought of the particular expression that crossed his countenance when she laughed unexpectedly, that fleeting, involuntary softening, as though her laughter were something he was storing against a future winter. "The fortune," she said at last, "you intend to restore it, regardless of what I decide this night." "Regardless of anything," he said. "It was simply and entirely right." She crossed the room then. She stopped before him and placed the locket into his open palm, and then she did not release it. Her fingers remained wrapped around his closed fist, and she felt the warmth of him against the cold of the locket's gold. "Then we begin again," she said. "No designs between us, no comfortable fictions, no carefully managed silences." She raised her eyes to his and held them there. "Only the truth, Edmund, from this night forward, only the truth." He turned his hand so that it held hers, fully, entirely, without reservation. "Only the truth," he said, "from this night forward and every night thereafter." The candles burned low in the library of Ravenscroft Manor. The cold draught from the east-facing windows grew still, as though the very house held its breath at the beginning of something rare and altogether irreversible. Not the end of a secret, not the close of a debt, but the beginning, at last, of something true. If this story moved something in you, if you found yourself standing in that library alongside Eleanor, heart in your throat, waiting for his answer, then this channel is yours, and it was made for you. Subscribe to the Duke's Lost Letters, leave us a comment telling us what you felt in that very last moment, and share this story with someone in your life who deserves a little Regency romance, a little hidden truth, and a great deal of candlelight. New stories arrive every week. We will be here, and we will be waiting for you.